Hey everybody, it's Jungle Jenna. So I'm back really fast with a new video. And today I'm just going to be continuing my new series where I talk about enemies to lovers romances and antagonistic romances and pretty much anything that just has like a Reylo-Esque vibe or has Reylo parallels to it. So the first book that I'm going to be talking about, I've already talked about in a previous video, but I would like to go into more depth because I have finally finished it. And this one is called Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase. And then here's the inside cover, because I always love the inside covers of romance novels. So this cover is slightly misleading because the girl on the cover looks very shy and demure, whereas the character Jessica in the book is actually kind of a spitfire, and I think that the first edition of the book did a better job of capturing the characters, which I did have, but this is kind of like full disclosure right here, but I have bipolar disorder, and I was going through a manic episode, and I went through and I tore off covers of books that I didn't really want to read anymore, but I wanted the covers. And so now I am so angry. Like, I have the cover of the original, like, first edition book, but I don't have the book anymore. So I'm so angry that I did that. Like, you just do stupid things when you're manic sometimes. But anyway, so talking about Lord of Scoundrels, in the first video I did talk about how the character of Sebastian, he's the lead male character, but he's often referred to as Dane. So I'm just going to call him Dane. So the prologue starts off with Dane as a child. It talks about his family, like his parents and how they came together. It was this old English aristocrat who took this very young Florentine girl who he was besotted with at first, but then when he actually got to know her temperament, like they really didn't get along. And so they ended up siring one child. And because his parents really didn't get along, Dane grew up in this very tumultuous environment. So even though he was born to wealth and privilege, he was oftentimes left alone. And, you know, he didn't really receive the love and support from his family that he really needed. And when he was a child, he was kind of like this awkward, gangly, like he's a very Kylo Ren-esque. Like, they often refer to him as ugly, or Dane views himself as being ugly, whereas Jessica views him as being beautiful later on in the book. But he has, like, a really large nose. He has kind of like that Kylo Ren nose and black eyes and black hair. And he's, as a child, he was very gangly and skinny, so he had, like, kind of disproportionate features. And his mom would buy him these storybooks, and he would like look through these storybooks, and the only people that looked like him were the villains. They were the witches and all of these other characters. So he really kind of started to view himself as being ugly. And and there are going to be spoilers. This is like spoiler talk for Lord of Scoundrels, so if you haven't read it, I totally recommend that you go read it, or listen to it on audiobook. The audiobook version was amazing. But anyway, his mom ends up running away with this younger man, and his father pulls him aside and basically tells him that his mother was Jezebel, and that any offspring of Jezebel is, doomed to suffer in life, and is basically the spawn of Satan. And his father sends him to Eton as soon as he possibly can. And at Eton, he is bullied by this group of boys that later become his friends because he actually summons the strength and the courage to stand up to them. But in the process, he ends up hardening his heart, and he really kind of ends up growing up to become this not so nice person. And that's why he's referred to as the Lord of Scoundrels, because he's pretty much like the ringleader of this group of men that live debaucherous lifestyles. And, they kind of Loretta Chase makes it a point to write in the story that Dane only really has the only type of woman that he really has an association with are like whores and prostitutes. And it's not because he's like one of those modern day guys that is married but has this really weird fixation on prostitutes, and like it's not really like that. It's more that he feels that if he can pay someone to like for their services, then they won't reject him, because he believes that he's unlovable and that he's ugly. And then he ends up meeting Jessica because her brother Bertie is involved with Dane, and he's basically like kind of spinning out of control and plunging the family into financial ruin. So she goes to Paris to try to save her brother and to confront this Dane who has been such a bad influence on him. And so the first time that she and Dane meet, there's kind of like this instant attraction, but their banter is amazing. Oh my goodness. Like Jessica, just like anytime that Dane starts to get too high on himself, or he thinks that he's got Jessica right where he wants her, she ends up knocking him down a few pegs, and she comes back with some pretty scathing remarks. And so their banter is wonderful, and it pretty much sustains throughout the entire book. The book is surprisingly not as heavy on the sex. I don't know if it's because it's an older romance novel that came out in the 90s, but it just doesn't really focus as much on the sex, even though like there are probably like 2 sex scenes in the whole book. But it's a very antagonistic-y romance. They have kind of this love-hate thing for each other where they just drive each other absolutely crazy, but they can't resist each other at the same time. Like their first kiss, for example, he's walking her home and it starts to rain, and she is so angry with him that she takes her bonnet and she starts to hit him repeatedly, and she's like insulting him the whole time and like yelling at him and scolding him. And he all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, just picks her up and grabs her and holds her to him, and he just starts kissing her. And at first she like continues to hit him with the bonnet and continues to like struggle against him, but then eventually she just succumbs to it and she just kisses him as passionately as he kisses her. And it's such an amazing moment because like there's just so much build up to it. Trying to think of what else. Oh, and then also even before they have like their first sex scene, like it all starts with them kind of having an argument or a fight, and Jessica is trying to provoke him, and he is like not wanting to rise to her bait, but he's kind of like he's kind of fighting a battle. And he keeps trying to grab her, but she keeps evading his grasp, and she like takes her slippers off and she throws it at him, and she throws other objects at him. And then ultimately the scene ends up with them having sex for the first time. So yeah, so that's just kind of the nature of their relationship. There's even a scene where he ends up kind of doing something to publicly humiliate her. And so she seeks her revenge by going to his house, and she ends up shooting him in the arm, and she like deliberately shoots him in the arm. It talks about how she's like a very good aim. She knows how to handle a gun. But then from that point forward, Dane's arm is paralyzed throughout pretty much the entire book. And they actually do a really cool thing with his arm, because his arm is supposed to represent that there's nothing really wrong with his arm, that a lot of it is in his head, and that he believes that he has like this fear in his heart of being loved and of letting other people in. And it isn't until he actually begins to let people in and allows himself to feel that love in return for those people that his arm actually starts to work again. And there's this really beautiful segment of the book where he ends up realizing that he has a son that he sired with this one prostitute, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with the child, because the child, Dominic, looks exactly like him. And so it reminds him of his childhood. It reminds him of all of the pain that he went through and his abandonment. So he wants nothing to do with the child. But he eventually concedes to Jessica's persistence that they take him in and raise him as raise him themselves. So he goes and he like takes care of his little boy, and he like washes him, and because he's like super filthy. And basically the whole idea behind this whole scene is that he is healing his child within him by accepting his little boy and confronting the child like his own child. So, because there are a lot of references throughout the entire book about how he's kind of like emotionally stunted in a way, like even though he's a man and he's in his early 30s, like in many ways he still is like the little boy that he was when his mother left and when his father told him that his mother was Jezebel and that he was the spawn of Satan. And so it has like, Dane's character has like a very Kylo Ren feel to it. Just because Kylo Ren also, I feel like, is kind of stunted emotionally, and he's like trying to figure out like who he is, and he has kind of some identity confusion. And so I think in some ways like Kylo Ren needs to do the same thing as Dane in terms of like confronting his inner child. I know I'm totally like therapizing Star Wars and romance novels right now, but I just thought that was like such a clever way to handle Dane's character. And I don't know, I just think that something like that, like Star Wars with Kylo Ren's character, would benefit from that as well. So that's pretty much it, like with Lord of Scoundrels. And I swear I didn't spoil everything. There was still a lot that I left out. But those are like the main things that I wanted to touch on. And then that's like the only book that I'm going to talk about right now. I have two antagonistic romances that I'm going to read. One is called The Raven Prince, and one is A Rogue by Any Other Name. So I'm kind of debating which one to start first, but I'm going to be doing my reviews of those and comparing them to Reylo in my next video. So I'm going to kind of move on to like movies. So this isn't necessarily like an enemies to lovers romance, but the movie Ever After, starring Drew Barrymore and Angelica Houston, that is one of my absolute favorite romances. And I think that in some ways, like, it does kind of have like a somewhat of an antagonistic-y romance in the beginning between Prince Henry and Danielle, because she's like a servant, and when they first meet, she presents herself as being one of the courtiers of the French noble court. And he kind of says some insulting things about servants and peasants, and that her beloved book of Utopia, he thought was boring because the everyday plight of the peasant just bores him. And so she thinks that he's like really conceited and full of himself at first. And even though I think that she does have an attraction to him that she denies, she overall kind of like is repelled by him, whereas like he's very intrigued by her and he wants to know more about her, and every chance that they encounter each other, he's like more and more besotted. So it kind of reminds me of Reylo a little bit, in the sense that like Rey kind of thinks that Kylo Ren is like despicable at first, but Kylo Ren just has like hard eyes, and he's just like following her around everywhere, like wanting to pick lightsaber fights with her, and like, doing his thing with her. So yeah, so I kind of think that, there's a little bit of similarities between Ever After and Reylo. And then obviously, like, Danielle does come to love Prince Henry, and they have a very beautiful romance. But that's about as much as I have to say about Ever After. But if you are interested in kind of like romances that have good banter, they do have some really good, quippy back and forth. And then the second movie I'm going to talk about, I actually have it here with me, is Warm Bodies. So it's basically about, it kind of takes place in like this dystopian world where there's been this zombie apocalypse, and the world is divided between like the world of the living and then the world of the dead. So it's and really it's a love story between a zombie and a human girl. And I know that sounds really weird, and some people might say that that sounds like Twilight-ish, but it's not like Twilight at all. It is so good. And it's really cute. It's funny. It has a good combination of romance, horror, and comedy. But I was talking to my friend Emily, and I were texting about it because I asked her if she had ever seen the movie, and she said yes. And so she was actually like, I mean, I understand, because I guess I should start by explaining that in Warm Bodies, the whole, and so this is a spoiler, so just be warned, but the whole premise of Warm Bodies is that this zombie man, he is turned back into a human because his love for the girl that is kind of like the key to his humanity. So, which is kind of like similar to Reylo, just if you're looking at it on a surface level, because Kylo Ren, we talk a lot about how, we want him to be redeemed, and we want Rey to be a big part of his redemption. And so, hopefully with The Rise of Skywalker, they kind of work it in a way where Kylo Ren's love for Rey does motivate him to become a better person and to be in touch with his humanity. But Emily was, so I kind of got like the deeper meanings of the movie, but Emily was like whipping out all of like these really cool parallels between Reylo and Warm Bodies. So I'm just going to paraphrase those. I have them in a text, but I'm just going to paraphrase what she said. So basically, Warm Bodies is actually a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. The zombie's name is R, so R for Romeo. The girl's name is Julie, Julie for Juliet. Julie's best friend is Nora, which N stands for nurse. And R's best friend is M, which stands for Mercutio. But aside from the Romeo and Juliet, kind of how it's an adaptation of that story, it's basically like where Romeo and Juliet, where Romeo ends up taking his own life because he believes that Juliet has died. R comes back to life because of his love for Julie. And in terms of like how it relates to Reylo and kind of like the parallels with Reylo, R and Julie kind of are the ones that inspire, like their love inspires this whole kind of ripple effect of bringing other zombies back to life and getting them in touch with their humanity as well. So according to Emily, like when we were talking, she was saying how this is similar to Reylo because Rey and Kylo Ren, like we view them as being the balance of the Force and restoring balance to the galaxy. So R and Julie, in a way, restored balance to their world by curing these zombies and bringing them back to themselves. So yeah, I hope that I did justice to Emily's thoughts. But yeah, it and also too, like other parallels, these are just kind of my own ideas. Or actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm all over the place with this because I'm trying to remember everything that she said. But Emily also talked about how in Warm Bodies, R, when he first meets Julie, Julie watches R eat her boyfriend. And so it's kind of like with Star Wars, Rey watches Kylo Ren kill Han. So Rey kind of has to overcome this mistrust of Kylo Ren because he killed someone that she was close to. Similarly to how Julie had to overcome her mistrust of R because he killed someone that she was close to and that she loved. And also, too, it's kind of similar. It's not really like an enemies to lovers romance in an antagonistic sense, but it is kind of because R kind of like ends up abducting Julie and he sees her and he immediately falls in love. And it's actually a really funny moment because she has a gun and she's like shooting and it's in slow motion and she looks really ferocious, but he's just totally besotted with her immediately. And but he ends up kind of abducting her and taking her back to his airplane, which is kind of where he lives. He lives at an airport, and she like does not trust him at all. She's terrified of him. She believes that he's going to eat her, and he has to kind of like work really hard to earn her trust and prove to her through his actions that he actually like cares for her well-being and doesn't want to harm her. So I think it's kind of not necessarily like an antagonistic romance necessarily, but it is kind of like they're not necessarily friends at first, and it takes a while for him to earn her trust. And you see like this slow progression of their relationship where she comes to see that he's not like the other zombies, and she really believes in his humanity. And that's kind of how it's similar to Reylo too, is that you know, Rey kind of has enough, like she has this slow progression with him where she senses the conflict in him and sees that there's more to him than just him being like this big bad. And so she believes in his humanity and actually risks her life going to the supremacy to bring Kylo Ren back to the light side and to even face Snoke, even though Snoke is far more powerful than she is. So there are some interesting parallels between Warm Bodies and Reylo, even if like you wouldn't necessarily think that right off the bat. But even if like you disregarded the parallels, like Warm Bodies is just a really enjoyable romance that if you like Reylo, I'm sure that you would like it too, because it's kind of about redemptive love. But yeah, that's pretty much all that I have for this video. Thank you so much for listening to my rambling, and I hope that you enjoyed the recommendations that I've offered. So if you have any other, I know that some in my last video, some of you mentioned some other things that I should check out, and there's one anime that I kind of would like to check out, and it's called Vampire Knight. And I know that Emily and I have talked about it a little bit, but I'm kind of curious about checking it out for myself. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. Bye.